We're going to look at the algorithm for multiplication in chapter 4.2. So you have here, think about how you would solve 3 times 213. Remember, we can think first of multiplication as repeated addition. So that's really just 213 plus 213 plus 213. So that's another kind of a physical way to think about it. But there are other techniques to multiply. You may not be familiar with the horizontal technique, which is really distributive property. If you look carefully right here, you see 3 times 213. You can write 213 in expanded form and then distribute, and so then that's a horizontal method. The more traditional algorithm is to do vertical, and then this is kind of like an intermediate algorithm. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 10 is 30. 3 times 200 is 600. And that's really what you're doing on the algorithm. You may be familiar with this process here when you do 213 times 3, right? 213 times 3. You go 3 times 3 is 9, add a 0. And the reason we're adding a 0 really is because you're doing 3 times 10. 3 times 1 is 3, but that's really 3 times 10. And then on the next one, you add a second 0. Right? And then you do 3 times 2 is 6. And then you end up with your 9. 3 and 6, but that's what you have there. There are alternative strategies to do this. Again, one is through distributive property or horizontal format. You can see here 34 times 12 is 34 times 10 plus 2, and you can get 408. Another way to think about it is through a picture here to a rectangle. So you end up drawing a rectangle, and then 20 and 3, break it up, 10 and 6, and then you do 3 times 6, 18, 3 times 10, 30, 20 times 10. And so this ends up being put together. You end up looking at this part here, building that, right? And then you go ahead and add it all together to get 368. So let's try those two methods just using 34 times 12. And so what you do is you break up the 34 to 30 and 4, 10 and 2, and then you go 4 times 10 is 40, 4 times 2 is 8, 30 times 10 is 300, 30 times 2 is 60, and then once you have all that, your answer for 34 times 12 is going to be 408, right? There's 300 plus 400 plus 8, so you end up with 408. You can end up adding that, right? 340, 68, and then you get your 408. Now, if we're going to do 23 times 16, you can then do 23 times 10 times 5 times 1. So you get 230. 23 times 5 is the same thing as 23 times 10 divided by 2. So it's another way to think about it. So that's 115 plus 23, and then you're going to end up with your 368 there. So those are alternative strategies that you want to introduce to students instead of the algorithm. The algorithm is just a memorized way of solving a problem, which works. It's efficient, and here are your methods for multiplying. The intermediate algorithm is kind of what we do in this picture here. It gets broken up into, there's your 8, 60, 40, and 300. It's just done now in a format instead of a rectangle. So either way works, right? And then you have a second intermediate process where you do 2 times 34. You do the whole thing, and then 10 times 34. So some people may be able to do it that way versus the standard algorithm is kind of the way we do it. 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times 3 is 6. Carry a 0. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 3 is 3. Or bring down a 0 and so forth. You get the same answer. But again, these processes here show number sense that you understand. Here, you're just doing your multiplication facts. Lastly, for multiplication, we have a lattice method for multiplication. We had one for addition. We now have one for for multiplication. And so what you do is you build your lattice, and then you're going to head and you put in your numbers here, similar to, again, don't get this method mixed up with the picture method, and then you put your lattice in, right? Finish in, so and now you have a lattice. And then what's going to happen is we multiply. And so what you have is 3 times 4 is 12. You have 3 times 5 is 15. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 5 is 10. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 4 is 4. And then just like in the other lattice method, we're adding down across. We add in that direction. And so then this becomes a 5. 2 plus 1 is 3. 1, 8, 1, 5, 13, 14, 15. That's a 5. You give the additional digit on this side. 1 plus 4 is 5. So there's your answer. 1, 2, 3 times 4, 5 is 5, 5, 3, 5. That's the lattice method for multiplication.